I caught my fiancé in bed with my sister. What are you gonna do? Cry? I just smiled and left. This morning my phone was full of missed calls from both of them. The texts were even worse. Derek wanted me to come back, to listen to his excuses, to somehow make sense of the chaos he had created. Sabrina, on the other hand, was frantic. She said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but they were both wrong. They thought they could guilt me into forgiving them. But I knew better now. I dropped my bag at the door, and kicked off my heels, the familiar scent of lemon polish, and expensive silence in the hallway a stark contrast to the storm inside me. The penthouse, my penthouse, it felt colder than I remembered, as if it had already started to turn on me. I was supposed to be celebrating. I had just closed the biggest deal of my career, a merger that would secure my position as CFO for the next decade. I was supposed to be flying high, but instead, I was falling. I had texted Derek that my flight was delayed, a small white lie, because I wanted to surprise him. I thought I would walk in, and he would be there, waiting for me, the man I was about to marry in 3 months. The elevator ride had felt shorter than usual, buoyed by champagne and the excitement of the future. I had convinced myself that maybe we were finally going to be happy together, but that hope died the second I heard that laugh. It wasn't a deep, throaty laugh. It was high-pitched, girlish, and painfully familiar. Sabrina. My blood didn't run cold, it evaporated. I stood frozen for a moment, hearing the sounds of their bodies tangled in sheets, the soft jazz music in the background, a soundtrack to the betrayal that was unfolding in front of me. I pushed the door open just enough to catch the sight of them. Derek with his arm draped lazily over her waist, while Sabrina giggled like they were sharing a secret. I wanted to scream, to break down in that moment, but I didn't. Instead, I just said his name, flat and hard like a stone dropping into a well. Derek. They froze. The music seemed to swell, mocking the silence that hung in the air. Sabrina scrambled off of him, covering herself with the sheets, her wide eyes betraying a panic that didn't feel real. Derek, though, didn't scramble. He propped himself up on his elbows and looked at me like I had interrupted his favorite TV show. "You're home early," he said, his voice rough with sleep and sex. He didn't look ashamed, he looked annoyed, clearly. I replied, my eyes already on Sabrina. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She was trembling, but I knew her. She wasn't trembling from guilt. She was trembling because she had been caught. "Get out of my bed, Sabrina," I said, my voice steady. "Meredith, wait." Derek started, trying to reach out, but I cut him off. "I don't want to hear it, Derek," I said. "Get out." Sabrina opened her mouth to speak, but Derek silenced her with a sharp wave of his hand. "I can explain," he said, his voice defensive. I looked at them both, and I felt the rage begin to bubble up. "You don't get to explain anything. Just get out of my bed. And get out of my life." But Derek wasn't done. He swung his legs off the bed and stood up, his bare feet hitting the plush carpet. He didn't care that he was standing there naked. He didn't care that everything was falling apart. He just cared about his ego. His tall frame loomed over me, his eyes narrowing as he looked me up and down. "Shut up, Derek," I whispered. The audacity of his words hit me like a slap. "I pay for this life. I pay for the bed you're defiling. I pay for the champagne you're drinking." He laughed, a barking, cruel sound that didn't even resemble the man I had fallen in love with. "That's all you are, Meredith," he sneered. "A checkbook. You think buying things makes you a wife. You're pathetic." I stood there still, not even flinching. He was right about one thing. I had spent years buying people's loyalty, trying to prove my worth through work and money. But this was different. "What are you gonna do, Meredith?" Derek's voice oozed with arrogance. "How are you gonna cry, throw a vase, make a scene, go ahead, scream, throw a fit? Prove to me that you actually have some blood in those veins. But you won't. Because without me, who are you? You're just a sad, aging workaholic with a checkbook and no one to warm your bed. You need me. We both know it." And that's when it happened. The fog lifted. The anger, the betrayal, the years of feeling like I wasn't enough, it all cleared away. In its place was something sharper. Something colder. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the kind of smile I used when I fired an embezzling employee. The kind of smile I used when I saw a fatal flaw in a competitor's contract. "You're right, Derek," I said softly. "I am." His smug expression faltered, just for a second. I won't cry," I whispered, reaching into my purse and pulling out the platinum engagement ring. The one I had bought for myself, because Derek's credit card was maxed out at the jeweler. I placed it gently on the dresser, beside the empty champagne bottle. "Enjoy the champagne," I said. "It's the last thing you'll ever taste on my dime." I turned on my heel and walked out, not slamming the door, not looking back. I heard Derek shout something, but I didn't care. I was already gone. I pressed the elevator button. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt light, weightless, like I had just shed a skin. I didn't answer any of Derek's calls. I couldn't. The phone screen flashed over and over with his name, his number, and sometimes even a frantic text, but I left it all unanswered. Sabrina's messages were a little more desperate, like she was afraid she might lose her grip on the situation if I didn't come back. But I couldn't find it in me to care. It was already too late. The truth sat like a stone in my stomach, heavy and solid. Derek had never been the man I thought he was, and Sabrina. She had been a stranger in my own family all along. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't see how it had gotten here. How had I let them both fool me for so long? Derek, he had been everything I thought I wanted. Confident, charming, always with a smile for me. He told me all the right things, and I had believed him. How could I have been so blind? I walked through the penthouse, now feeling like a stranger in my own home. The polished floors gleamed under the soft lighting, but it felt sterile, empty. The warmth that once filled the place had faded, replaced by a coldness that came from the realization that everything I had built, everything I had worked for, had been a lie. I had spent years trying to keep it all together, trying to keep my family, my life from falling apart. And now, it had shattered in a single moment. I thought of my father, the promise I had made to him. I had been his strong one. The one who always cleaned up after everyone else's mess. I had promised to take care of my family, but it felt like every time I did, they took, and I had nothing left to give. Nothing except the weight of responsibility. I walked to the kitchen, feeling the need to do something, anything. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water, the cool liquid hitting the back of my throat as I tried to calm the churn in my chest. I didn't cry. Not yet. I wasn't even sure I could cry anymore. There was nothing left to mourn, no more illusions left to protect. I set the glass down and went to the study, my laptop waiting for me on the desk. It had been sitting there for hours, just a silent reminder of everything that had been left undone, everything I had pushed aside. I had been so focused on Derek, on us, on making things work that I had ignored the cracks forming around me. Sitting down, I opened the laptop, logging into the system I used to monitor our company's finances. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe I was hoping that I would find some sign that it was all a mistake, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But I didn't find that. What I found instead were discrepancies. Small ones at first. Charges to the company credit card for things I didn't recognize. Dinner tabs, a couple $100 here, a few thousand there. But it wasn't until I pulled up the larger transactions, the ones hidden under layers of approval forms, that I saw the truth. Derek had been stealing from the company, not just for himself, but to cover Sabrina's gambling debts. I felt numb as I clicked through the financial records. The numbers didn't lie. Derek had been siphoning money from the business and redirecting it into a shell company he had set up with Sabrina's name. The thought made me sick. They had been using me, using my money, my trust, to build a future that didn't even include me. I wasn't just the neglected fiancé anymore. I was the fool. The anger started to rise in my chest. It wasn't the first time I had seen numbers that didn't add up, but now, it was personal. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about everything they had stolen from me. My trust, my family, my future. I slammed the laptop closed and leaned back in my chair, the weight of the day pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront them both, to throw everything in their faces, to make them see the destruction they had caused. But another part of me, the part that had spent so many years trying to fix everything, trying to make people happy, knew that wasn't the right move. Not yet. I needed a plan. I needed to be smart. And the smartest thing I could do was gather the evidence, make sure I had everything in place before I did anything else. Derek and Sabrina had no idea what was coming for them. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. Not of my emotions, those were still a whirlwind, but of the situation. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak. They thought I would cry. But I wasn't going to cry. Not for them. Not for anyone. I wasn't going to let them see the version of me they had created. I was going to take back my life. And when I was done, they wouldn't know what hit them. But first, I needed to get organized. I needed to set the stage for what was coming. And that meant making sure I had everything I needed. I opened the drawer beside my desk, pulling out the business cards of my lawyer, and the private investigator I had worked with in the past. It was time to call in the big guns. Time to make sure that what I had started, I finished. Tomorrow, everything would change. I couldn't avoid them forever. The calls, the messages, they kept coming, like a relentless tide crashing against the walls I had built around myself. But I didn't pick up. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat in the study, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, knowing that at some point, I would have to face them both. But not yet. Not until I had everything in place. It was 2 days before I called Derek. The anger was still fresh, raw, but it had settled into something colder, more calculating. I didn't want to hear his apologies. I didn't want to listen to his excuses. What I needed now was control. He picked up on the first ring, his voice immediately trying to cover the tension in the air. "Mare, hey, I was wondering when you'd call." "Don't," I said, my voice steady. I was proud of how calm I sounded. I'd always prided myself on my composure, especially in moments like this. "I don't want to talk about us. I want to talk about the company." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh on the other end. "The company? What's that got to do with anything right now? I thought we were." "No," I cut him off. "We're not doing this right now, Derek. I know about the money. I know about the fraud." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost hear him trying to piece together a response, some excuse, some reason to explain away his actions. But there was nothing. Nothing he could say would make this right. "You've been embezzling money from the company," I continued, my voice colder now. "You've been funneling it into some shell company, and Sabrina's been involved in all of it. Don't deny it. I have the evidence. The numbers don't lie." There was a sharp intake of breath. I could hear him shifting around on the other end of the line, but I didn't care. "Mare, listen, it's not like that. I was just trying to help Sabrina out." "No," I interrupted again, "you were stealing, and I'm done with it." His voice rose, desperation creeping in. "You don't understand, Meredith. This was all for us. I was trying to build something for us. For us." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You don't get to say us. You're not building anything for me. You've been building your own little empire on my dime, my hard work. And now you want to play the victim." The words tasted like poison in my mouth, but they needed to be said. I wasn't the victim here. I hadn't been for a long time. And Derek's desperate little story wasn't going to change that. "I've been covering for you, Derek," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been fixing your mistakes, cleaning up your messes, for years. And I'm done. It's over." There was a long silence. I could almost hear him trying to come up with something, but there was no excuse left to give. Finally he spoke, his voice lower now, more resigned. "So, what now? What now?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Now I'm going to make sure you and Sabrina pay for what you've done. I'm going to make sure the board knows everything. I'm going to make sure your little business venture crumbles to the ground." He didn't respond right away, but I could feel the weight of his shame pressing through the phone. It was almost satisfying. He wasn't the confident man I had once known. He wasn't the man who had charmed me into believing in him. He was just a liar, a thief, standing on the edge of everything he'd built, watching it all fall apart. "You're really going to do this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're really going to destroy everything?" "Wes," I said, my resolve hardening. "I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. And that includes Sabrina." He didn't say anything for a long time, and for a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. But then he muttered, barely audible, "You're not the woman I thought you were. And I'm not the woman you deserve," I replied, my voice sharp. "Goodbye, Derek." I ended the call before he could say anything else. The room felt eerily quiet afterward, the silence in my apartment settling like dust on the furniture. I was used to silence. I had lived in it for years, drowning in the noise of other people's needs and expectations. But now, this silence was different. This silence was mine. I sat in the study for a while, staring at the phone in my hand, the weight of what I had just done sinking in. It wasn't enough to confront Derek. That was just the beginning. I had to be methodical now, careful. I had to make sure I had everything locked in place before I could start tearing everything down. It was time to start the next phase of my plan. And this time, I wasn't going to play nice. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me, use me, like they always had. This was about me now. I reached for my laptop again, opening up the file where I had saved everything, every transaction, every email, every record that proved Derek and Sabrina's betrayal. I needed to organize it all. I needed to be prepared. The next move was crucial. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The pieces were falling into place. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of activity. I called my lawyer and began the process of setting up the security measures I needed to catch Derek and Sabrina in the act. I wasn't going to give them a chance to explain themselves away. I knew how they operated: charm, lies, manipulation. I wasn't going to fall for it again. I needed concrete evidence, irrefutable proof that they were not just betraying me personally but were committing crimes, using my money, my resources, my trust. The lawyer was more than willing to help. He set up a meeting with a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. His name was Marcus, and I could tell from the start that he was exactly what I needed: calm, methodical, and detail-oriented. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, even though I knew he had probably seen cases like this 100 times before. But I wasn't here for the usual. I wanted to tear this apart. I wanted to see them both brought down, their lies exposed. "Do you think you have enough to go after them legally?" Marcus asked, his fingers tapping on his tablet as he took notes. "I have the financial records," I said, opening the laptop I'd brought with me. I didn't have everything, not yet, but I had enough to start. I showed him the transactions I'd found, the unexplained withdrawals, the wire transfers to the shell company Sabrina was involved with. I wasn't sure if this was enough to make a case for embezzlement, but it was a start. Marcus scrolled through the numbers and nodded. "This is solid. You've been tracking everything already, right?" "I've been tracking it for months," I said. "I was suspicious about the financials a while ago, but I didn't know how deep it went until I found them." He didn't need me to finish the sentence. We both knew what I meant. The affair, the betrayal. But this was about more than just personal pain. This was about power and control and trust. I wasn't just going to let them walk away from this. Not after everything. "Okay," Marcus said, standing up and gathering his things. "I'll start digging. I'll get the rest of the evidence we need. You need anything else, you call me. We'll make sure this goes down hard." I nodded. "I want them both to lose everything. I want them to see how it feels to have everything you've built ripped away. And I want them to know it was me who did it." Marcus paused at the door, looking back at me. "Just make sure you're ready for what's coming, Isla. You're about to take down a lot more than just a couple of people." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew what I was getting into. This was going to be ugly, but I was ready. It had to be done. That night, I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still rushing through me, my mind racing with possibilities. What would happen when Derek and Sabrina finally realized they had no more cards to play? What would they say when they saw me standing there, holding everything they'd done in my hands, watching their empire crumble? I knew they would try to justify it. I knew they would make excuses. But I wasn't going to listen to any more of their lies. I had already heard enough. I spent the next few days doing my own research, compiling the financial records, creating a timeline, and getting everything in order. I had set up the surveillance system in the penthouse the day after Marcus left, making sure I had cameras in all the right places. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. If Derek and Sabrina were smart, they'd already figured out what was coming. But if they hadn't, they were about to. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. The financial records were locked in a safe place, backed up, and ready to be used. The cameras were in position, and I had been reviewing the footage to make sure nothing was missed. Every detail mattered now. Every second counted. I didn't hear from Derek or Sabrina. At least, not directly. I knew they were both still trying to reach me, still thinking that if they called enough, if they apologized enough, I'd eventually come back to them. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. I had to do this the right way. I had to make sure they would never get away with it. I set up a meeting with my lawyer the next day, ready to move forward with everything. I felt like a different person. The woman who had once been the caretaker, the fixer, the one who cleaned up everyone's messes, she was gone. In her place was someone sharper, colder, and far more determined. I wasn't just going to fight for myself anymore. I was going to make sure Derek and Sabrina paid for everything they had done. For everything they thought they could get away with. This was the point of no return. There was no going back after this. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace I had once sought, the quiet after the storm. No, this was a different kind of peace, the kind that came from knowing I was in control, knowing I had the power to end this, once and for all. The next move was crucial. I would need to be careful, but I was ready. I'd been playing their game for too long. Now, the tables had turned. I woke up the next morning to an empty apartment. For the first time in days, there was no barrage of texts, no missed calls. Just the hum of the city outside, the faint smell of coffee from the kitchen, and the weight of what was coming. I had made my decision, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Derek and Sabrina weren't going to give up quietly. They would fight, they would try to manipulate me again, and they would try to make me feel guilty. But I was done being manipulated. I had already given them enough chances, and I wasn't about to let them ruin my life any further. The plan was in motion, and I was ready to carry it out. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, confirming that everything was set for the upcoming meeting. The surveillance footage was in place, the evidence was gathered, and the legal steps had been mapped out. All I had to do now was execute the final stages of the plan. The phone call was brief, but it gave me a sense of control. I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. This time, I was in charge. I set the phone down and stared out the window for a moment, watching the early morning light filter through the curtains, the city coming to life below. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The anger I'd felt when I first discovered the affair had shifted into something colder, something more deliberate. I wasn't just seeking revenge. I was seeking justice. And I was going to get it, no matter what. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing everything. I pulled up the financial records again, double-checking the transactions, making sure nothing had been missed. Every withdrawal, every shady transfer, every falsified invoice, it was all right there in black and white. I felt a strange satisfaction as I clicked through the files, knowing that I had the upper hand now. The next part of the plan was simple. I needed to confront them, not face to face, not yet, but in a way that would leave no room for doubt. I would expose them both, show them the evidence, and make sure they understood exactly how deep their betrayal had gone. I arranged for a private meeting with Marcus, the private investigator. He had been invaluable in getting everything set up. He had contacts that I didn't, resources that I couldn't access on my own. He'd been a quiet presence in the background, but now it was time to bring everything to the forefront. I called him late in the afternoon, setting up a time to meet the next day. I needed him there, when the truth came out, needed him to make sure the legal side of things was handled properly. This wasn't just about exposing their lies, it was about making sure I had the evidence I needed to protect myself and my future. The following morning, I prepared for the confrontation. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that penthouse weeks ago. That woman had been lost, unsure, questioning everything. But now, I knew who I was. I knew what I was capable of, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. I walked into the conference room with Marcus at my side, the heavy scent of polished wood, and the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning surrounding us. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, but I forced myself to focus. This was the moment when everything changed. Derek was already sitting at the head of the table, his usual arrogance radiating from him. He was dressed sharply, trying to appear calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. Sabrina sat next to him, her usual confidence replaced by a hint of nervousness. I could see it in the way she shifted in her seat, the way she avoided looking directly at me. "Meredith," Derek said, his voice smooth, attempting to mask the nervousness beneath. "We were hoping we could talk about this. Figure things out." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the head of the table, where Derek had been sitting just moments before. I wasn't going to let him control this meeting, let him manipulate me again. I sat down, the chair creaking under me, and looked them both in the eye. "I don't want to talk about us, Derek," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "I want to talk about the company." Derek's face shifted, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't know what I was getting at, but Sabrina's eyes darted quickly to him, and I saw the flash of recognition. They knew I had found something. They knew I had the upper hand now. What about the company? Derek asked, trying to regain control, his tone still that of the man who thought he could talk his way out of anything. I placed a folder in front of him, the evidence of their crimes neatly arranged. I've been reviewing the financial records. I've seen the unauthorized transfers, the invoices for services that don't exist, the payments to a shell company. I've seen it all, Derek. I could feel the tension in the room spike. Sabrina froze, her hand trembling slightly as she picked at a thread on her sleeve. Derek, on the other hand, tried to play it cool, but his eyes flickered with panic. This is a misunderstanding, Meredith, Derek said, his voice low. You're overreacting. No, I said, my voice cold and firm. I'm not overreacting, I'm protecting myself. I'm making sure you don't destroy everything I've worked for. I reached for the laptop I had brought with me, and opened it to a file containing the surveillance footage. This is where things get interesting, I said, clicking play. The room filled with the sound of their voices, Derek's casual tone, Sabrina's flirtatious laugh. And then, in an instant, the truth was there. I had caught them. The conversations they thought they could hide from me. The way they manipulated the company funds. The lies they had told to cover up their affair. It was all there, clear as day. I watched as their faces changed. Derek's usual confidence crumbling in front of him. Sabrina's composure cracking under the pressure. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of power surge through me. This was it. This was my moment. This is just the beginning, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. You've both betrayed me, and now you'll pay the price. Derek's eyes shifted from the screen to me, his lips trembling. Meredith, please. You don't understand. We were just... No, I said, cutting him off. There's nothing left to say. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as the silence stretched out between us. This was it. The moment everything changed. Now I had them exactly where I wanted them. The silence stretched out in the conference room, thick and oppressive. Derek and Sabrina didn't speak, didn't try to argue anymore. They just sat there, the weight of their betrayal hanging in the air between us. I could see them trying to piece things together in their minds, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. But it was too late for them to fix it. I leaned back in my chair, watching them carefully. Derek looked defeated, like all the confidence he had built up over the years was slipping away. His shoulders slumped, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, but he didn't drink, he just stared at it, his mind clearly elsewhere. Sabrina, on the other hand, was shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Her face was pale, but she still had that look of defiance in her eyes, like she was waiting for a way out. I wasn't going to give them that. There was no escape this time. Not for either of them. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? I said, my voice low but firm. You thought I would just go on, letting you both take advantage of me, just like always. Derek finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. What do you want, Meredith? Money? Is that it? You've always had the money, but you wanted more. You wanted everything. I could feel the anger rising again, but I controlled it, keeping my tone steady. This isn't about money, Derek. Not anymore. This is about respect. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me, using me, and I'm done. Sabrina scoffed, but I could hear the nervous edge in her voice. You don't get it, do you? We were just... No. I cut her off sharply. You don't get it. You thought I would just forgive you both. You thought I was too weak to see what you were doing. But you were wrong. The truth hit them both hard. I could see it in their eyes, the way their expressions changed from anger to realization. They had underestimated me. Do you really think I'm going to just let you walk away from this? I asked, my voice rising now, not with anger but with the cold clarity of someone who knew what was coming next. I'm going to make sure this ends for both of you. And when it's over, you'll both be left with nothing. Derek opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Sabrina's lips parted like she was about to say something, but she too was silent. I pushed the papers across the table, the evidence of their betrayal staring back at them. You wanted to play the game, but now the game's over. You've both been caught. There's no turning back. I stood up slowly, walking to the window and looking out at the city. The sky was overcast, but the city still pulsed with life, oblivious to the small world of betrayal I was about to dismantle. I wasn't scared anymore. I didn't feel the need to prove myself to them or anyone else. I knew who I was. And I wasn't going to let them take that from me. Turning back to face them, I saw Derek and Sabrina sitting there, trapped in the web they had woven. Sabrina was no longer the confident, manipulative sister I had once known. She was just a woman who had been caught, and I could see the fear in her eyes now. Derek, the man I had loved, had gone from charming to pathetic in the blink of an eye. He was still trying to hold on to some semblance of control, but I could see it slipping away from him, piece by piece. "This is what's going to happen next," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the silence. "I'm going to report everything. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done, what you've stolen from me. And when the dust settles, you'll both be left with nothing." Derek opened his mouth, but I wasn't interested in hearing anything more from him. I had heard enough. The lies, the manipulation, it had all been building to this moment. And now that it was here, there was no way out for them. Sabrina's eyes flicked to Derek, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. She knew it was over. "I'm not asking for anything from you," I continued, turning back to face them. "I'm done with you both. But I won't let you ruin my life any longer." I grabbed my purse from the table, feeling the finality of the gesture. There was no turning back now. No going back to the woman I had been. The fixer. The one who always put everyone else's needs first. I was done being the victim. With one last look at them, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. As I stepped into the elevator, I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I had taken the first step, the hardest step. But there was still work to do. The legal battle was just beginning, and I was ready for it. I wasn't going to let Derek or Sabrina get away with what they had done. And when it was over, I would be free. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of motion, but nothing about it was real. I was moving, but it was like I was floating, detached from everything. The first step in my plan had been executed, and now I was just waiting for the fallout. I knew Derek and Sabrina were trying to figure out how to fix things, but they didn't have the power anymore. The evidence was in place, the pieces were set, and the next part of the plan was already in motion. I sat in my office, staring at the city outside, my mind racing. The world was still moving, still oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I had built my life around control, around structure, and now everything I had known was crumbling. But this was different. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about power, about taking back what had been stolen from me. It was about setting the boundaries I had ignored for too long. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was Marcus, the private investigator. I took a deep breath before answering. I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. "Meredith," Marcus said, his voice low. "It's done. We've got everything we need. The financials are locked in, and the recordings from the surveillance cameras are enough to build the case." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It was a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. "Are they going to take the deal?" Marcus paused for a moment. "They're not going to have a choice, Meredith. They've already dug themselves too deep. The evidence is clear, and the legal team is ready to file. We just need you to sign off, and we're ready to move forward." I could hear the weight of what he was saying, but it didn't feel real. It felt like I was talking about someone else's life, not mine. It was hard to wrap my mind around the fact that I was the one pulling the strings now. I had always been the one to clean up everyone else's mess, to take care of things when they fell apart. But now, I was the one who had caused this, and I wasn't apologizing for it. "I'm ready," I said finally, my voice steady. "Let's do it." The conversation ended quickly, and I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the documents on my desk. This was the moment I had been working toward. The moment when everything would change. I had always thought I would find peace in the quiet, in the calm after the storm. But now, as I looked at the mess I had created, I realized that peace wasn't what I was looking for anymore. The door to my office opened, and Sarah walked in, a concerned look on her face. She had been my friend for years, always there when I needed her. But I hadn't told her everything. I hadn't shared the details of what was really happening, of what I was about to do. I had kept it all close, tucked away in the corner of my mind, knowing that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. "Meredith, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet. She knew something was off. I could see it in the way she looked at me, the way she hesitated before speaking. You've been different lately. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to explain it to her. How could I tell her that I was about to destroy two people I had once loved? People who had been a part of my life for so long. How could I tell her that, despite everything, I was ready for it? I'm fine, I said finally, my voice distant. Everything's going according to plan. Sarah didn't buy it. I could see the concern in her eyes as she stepped closer. You don't have to do this alone, Meredith. Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it by yourself. I looked up at her, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel something other than numbness. I felt a flicker of gratitude, a small spark of something that I had buried for so long. But that feeling quickly faded. I'm not alone, Sarah, I said softly, my words feeling heavier than I expected. I've been alone for a long time. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off before she could. I don't want to talk about it, not right now, I said firmly. But thank you. I know you're here. She nodded, sensing that there was nothing more to say. Just know that you don't have to do this by yourself, okay? I nodded back, but my mind was already on the next step. There wasn't time for comfort, for friendship, not anymore. This was about something much bigger than me, bigger than all of them. This was about making sure I was never put in this position again, about taking back control over my life. I'll be fine, Sarah, I said, my voice steadier now, but I appreciate it, I really do. She smiled softly before leaving, and I returned to the documents on my desk. My mind was racing again, the plans I had made spinning through my head. The next few days would be critical. There was no room for error. But as I prepared to take the final steps, something else hit me. A small, almost imperceptible feeling that had been creeping in over the past few days. Doubt. But I pushed it away. There was no room for doubt now. There was no turning back. I had already made my decision, and when it was over, they would understand that this wasn't just about business. This was about something deeper, something personal. Something they would never recover from. The countdown had begun. I stared at the phone screen, the words of the text message still flashing before my eyes. It was from my mother. Meredith, how could you do this? How could you turn your back on your own family like this? Sabrina is devastated, Derek's in pieces. What happened to you? You're supposed to be the strong one. Fix this. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat back in the chair, letting the silence fill the room. I thought about everything that had led me here. About my father's deathbed promise. About the years of silent sacrifices. About the endless betrayals that I had been too afraid to confront. The guilt had been eating me alive for so long. But now, with the dust finally settling, there was nothing left to feel except for relief. And a little bit of victory. The trial had been quick. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek and Sabrina's lies had been laid bare for the world to see. They thought they were untouchable, but in the end, they were nothing more than two people who had underestimated me. Their lawyers had tried to twist things, to make it look like I was the villain. But it was clear to everyone in the courtroom who had been wronged. Sabrina had cried during her testimony, her tears pouring down her face as she painted herself as a victim. She had played the part well, but the evidence spoke for itself. The forged documents, the illicit transfers of money, the embezzlement, it was all there, black and white. There was no escaping the truth. Derek had tried to remain composed, but he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. He had once been so confident, so smug, as if nothing could ever touch him. But now, standing in that courtroom, he was just a man desperate to save himself from the consequences of his actions. And it was too late. The jury had deliberated for only a few hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. I had watched them as they read it aloud, and I couldn't help the faint sense of satisfaction that washed over me. They had paid for their sins. And for once, I didn't feel bad about it. I didn't feel guilty. The judge had sentenced Derek to 5 years in prison for his role in the fraud, and Sabrina had received a lesser sentence, 2 years, plus probation and community service. I had always known she was the weaker of the two, but seeing her face crumble, as she realized just how much damage she had caused, was a small piece of justice in itself. But it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The final part of my plan had been to make sure they both knew the full weight of what they had done. I had been methodical. I had been patient. But when the time came to strike, I didn't hesitate. The morning after the trial, I drove to the old family house in Maple Ridge. The rain had started again, just as it had on that fateful day, when I had walked out of that penthouse for the last time. The sky was a thick, oppressive gray. The kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it was. But as I walked through the front door, I felt lighter. I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. My mother had been there, of course. She had come to collect the last remnants of her dignity, to beg for some sign of sympathy. But there was no sympathy left for her, not after everything she had done, not after the lies, the manipulation, the way she had taken everything from me and given it to Sabrina. I looked at her as she stood there, clutching her purse like a shield. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling with outrage. "I'm here to make sure you understand what's happening," I said, my voice calm, but firm. "This house, the one you've lived in for the past 10 years, it's mine. I bought it. I paid for it. And I'm putting it on the market." Her face turned white, the shock evident in her expression. "You can't do that. You can't just take everything from us." "Actually, I can," I replied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "You've spent years draining me dry, and I'm done. I'm taking back what's mine." She tried to argue, to twist the truth, but it was useless. The deal had already been made. The house was sold, and my mother was left with nothing. The few possessions she had left were packed up and sent to a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town. No more luxury. No more leeching off me. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. And so, just like that, everything changed. I didn't look back as I walked out of the house. The weight of it all was finally starting to lift. The anger, the resentment, the years of being taken advantage of, all of it was slipping away. I had done what needed to be done. The only thing left was to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to do just that. I didn't hear from Derek or Sabrina again. The calls stopped, the texts ceased, and I went about my life, free from the chains that had held me for so long. I sold the company, Phoenix Ventures, for a small fortune. The scandals surrounding Derek and Sabrina had given it a visibility I never could have imagined. I rebranded it, cleaned house, and sold it to a major conglomerate. With the money from the sale, I bought a small house on the coast, far from the chaos, far from the people who had taken so much from me. The air was salty and fresh, the waves crashing against the rocks below. I could finally breathe. I started painting, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I was terrible at it, but I loved it. It was mine, something I did just for myself. And then, one day, I met him, David. He was an architect, successful in his own right, with his own career, his own life. He didn't need me to fix him. He didn't need anything from me except for me. We had coffee one afternoon, and by the time we were done talking, I knew that this was something different. He didn't judge me, he didn't pity me, he just listened. And when I told him my story, I expected him to run. But he didn't. He poured me more wine, grinned, and said, "Remind me never to piss you off." For the first time in a long time, I laughed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of the past. The future was mine. And this time, it wasn't about fixing anything. It was about living.